Okay, I will get started. Sorry about that. So, hey everyone, I am Riley from Gadget. I'm developer advocate here at Gadget. And today I am going to do a quick Shopify, Gadget, and Airtable integration. So, I'm going to take data from Shopify, I'm going to work with product data. I'm going to use Gadget to handle the Shopify webhooks. I'm going to use Gadget to then forward data to an Airtable instance. I'm only going to do one-way sync from Shopify to Airtable today. If there is interest in going from Airtable back to Shopify, let me know in the chat, reach out on our Discord, send me an email. We might do a follow-up session. There is some complications when you're working with Airtable webhooks because you have to refresh them every 7 days. So fitting it into a kind of this 45-minute webinar timeframe is a little dicey. I'm also going to use Google Cloud Tasks to show how you can handle Airtable's rate limiting. So they do have I believe it's 5 requests per second, a rate limit. And if you are doing a big sync or a sync on a large store, you may need to manage that rate limit. So I'm going to set up a Google Cloud Tasks instance to show you how you can queue these tasks and then forward information to Airtable, take that rate limit into account. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I mentioned before in the chat, if you do have any questions, just ask in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on it as I go and answer along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating my new Gadget app. I'm going to select the Shopify app starter, click next, give my app a domain. Let's call it Airtable webinar, and I'll click get started. And when I do this, I get my Gadget app fully set up. So this is going to be my Postgres database, Node.js backend, as well as a React front end that is powered by Vite. So I'm going to kind of walk through all of those layers of my stack. The front end isn't as important right now for this example. So we're mostly going to be using the database, the backend, as well as the Shopify connection. So that leads me to the next thing. I am going to connect to Shopify right away. We'll just open up my partner's dashboard. I can just click this connect to Shopify button. We always recommend connecting through the partner's dashboard just because this does give you the ability to build Shopify app extensions. You can do embedded front ends right in the admin, and it is suitable for both custom and public app development. So there's no downside. We do always recommend going through this method. So in my partner's dashboard, I've just gone to the apps page. I'm going to go ahead and create a new app, create it manually. Once again, Airtable webinar. So this creates an app on Shopify side, and now I just need to copy these client credentials over to my Gadget app. I'm going to copy my ID and secret, and I'll click connect. This is kind of the first Gadget framework page where we're starting to abstract some of what Shopify requires you to do to get set up. So on this page, I select what Shopify API scopes and data models I want to include in my Gadget app. So for example, I just want to work with product data right now. I'm going to go ahead and select just the products read scope just because I'm going to read and forward data to Airtable. I'm not going to do the inverse. If I did want to write data from Airtable to Shopify, I would also need to select that write scope. And I'm just going to select the Shopify product data model for now. If you're not certain what scopes and models you need when you're starting building your app, that's A-okay. You can always go ahead and edit this connection later, so you don't need to know it all up front. I will just press confirm. We have this little preview dialog that shows you all the webhooks you're subscribing to, what models you're getting out of the box. Just go ahead and press confirm. So you'll notice that I did get my Shopify data models imported for me. I have my product model as well as sync, GDPR request, and shop models, which are just default models we create for you every time you connect to Shopify. I'm going to finish setting up my connection. I have this app URL and redirection URL that I'm just going to copy and paste into my partner's app. Oh, there we go. There's my app URL, now my redirection URL. I'm going to save. And now to finish setting up my connection, I can just install on a store. So I'm going to go ahead, go back to the overview page of my partner's app, click select store. And I am going to go ahead and choose, let's go check out branding testing. This is one of my shops. So you'll notice I haven't written a line of OAuth code yet. Gadget handles all of that for you. All I need to do is click install app. and my app will be installed on my development store. And then I can actually start writing my business logic. Perfect. So my app is now installed on my development store. This is actually a React front end that is hosted on your Gadget project. I'm actually not going to touch this at all for the rest of this webinar, but I do just want to briefly point it out before I move on to the Airtable stuff. So this is all, it's using Polaris 12 now, so latest version of Polaris that I think they just promoted to or out of beta the other week. So if I do go to my Gadget app, front end folder, shop page JSX. This is the page that is, or the code, the JSX, the React code that is powering this front end experience. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh that page. You'll notice that if I go hello world up top here, this is in the top banner. Oh, we asleep at the wheel here. Let's just try refreshing again. So it says hello world. We do have, let me try and delete hello world now. There you go. So HMR works. Need to give it a bit of a kick in the pants, but it is like your kind of normal front end development experience. I'm going to move past this now. We're not going to touch on front ends again for the rest of this webinar. So when I set up that connection, I got my front end. I also set up these Shopify models, and I got these CRUD actions that are actually connected to Shopify webhooks. So I can see I have my create, update, and delete actions for my Shopify product. And I have these triggers up top. So if I click here on the Shopify webhook, I can see I am now subscribed to the product create and update webhook here. The update is for like an upsert. If it doesn't already exist in Gadget, it will create that record instead. And on those webhooks, I will be running this code file. So there's a run and on success function. Run is good for storing data in your Gadget database. On success is great for side effects. We're going to use on success to forward this data to Airtable. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to show how this works as a sample. Ooh, we see we have some spicy products in here already. I'm going to go ahead and add a new product. I'll keep with the food theme. Let's go just noodles. This is my product. And I do need to give it a SKU. And I'll press save. So if I go to my data now, I can see my noodles have been added to my Gadget database. So that's fantastic. The next step is I want to be able to send this all the way to Airtable. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by loading up or downloading, installing an Airtable NPM client. So I can open up the Gadget command prompt here. I can just click up here, but it's also Command P. I'm going to go ahead and enter command mode here just by doing the kind of left arrow, and I'll go yarn add Airtable. This will install the Airtable NPM client. This will help me to just forward data right to Airtable here. Once it is done installing, taking its time. So like I said, your backend Gadget is just Node.js, so that's why we're able to use npm packages. If I go, you see there's a package.json in your file explorer. I have this Airtable client installed now, so that's fantastic. We're ready to move on. I am just going to add a new file here. I'm just going to call it airtable.js. Oh, I made a folder, not a file. Let's go ahead and remove that. File, airtable.js. So in this file, I can actually set up my Airtable client. So for most of this tutorial, I'm gonna copy paste code and then I will walk through it, just because watching me type all this code is not particularly engaging. So I'm gonna go ahead and here's my Airtable client. So I'm using a require in this case from my Airtable package that I just installed. And then I can see we're setting up this client. We do need an API key from Airtable. I'm setting the base using a base ID, and then I'm actually connecting to this table. So I need a table ID from Airtable. So I'm going to flip. I've already created this Airtable instance. Whoa. I think I have a Phantom app installed on my store. that is already syncing to Airtable. So I'm just going to go ahead and uninstall that. Airtable testing. There we go. So as you can see, we are going to get to a state where this syncing works. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this product. But I've already set up my Airtable or Airtable table right here. I need to go ahead and grab that access token, base ID, table ID, and then store them in Gadget. So if I go over to my developer hub in Airtable and I go to personal access token. So I've already created a personal access token that I am going to use, but this is where I could go ahead and create a new token that I use in Airtable. Just go back here. And then if I go to the Airtable box and I go to the base data and I go into bases, list bases, get base schema. So there are ways, hold on here. So you can see that getting the, I am just trying to find this now. So getting that table and base ID is actually part of our URL. I'll just skip right to the chase here. It is somewhere in their API docs, but I have my base ID right here and my table ID right here. You see the base starts with app, table starts with TBL. So I'm just going to store these as environment variables in Gadget. I'm going to flip over here, click on settings and open my environment variables. And then I am going to go ahead and I will add a couple variables. So I'm going to call this first one Airtable access token. I'm going to go Airtable table ID, and I believe the other one was Airtable base ID. And now I'll be able to access these values from my client once I fill in values. So I'm just going to go ahead. I already have my base and table ID stored separately, so I'll just input that, input my table ID. For my personal access token, I'm just going to quickly, we'll just do a quick, and I can encrypt it. I'm going to refresh that access token after this webinar, so you won't be able to kind of grab that screenshot. So I've got all this information now. I'm using it in my client. So now I can actually use this table object to send data from Gadget to Airtable whenever that webhook triggers. So all my edits are going to be made in my Shopify product model. What I am going to do is I will start. You can also, just kind of before I move on, we'll start with create actually. I am just going to copy paste again, paste this into here. I will walk through the code. I changed this a little bit. I just called it airtable.js. So here I'm importing that table that I set up here in my Airtable object or client. And then I am just calling table.create, and I'm passing in data that is the same shape as the Airtable table that I already created. So all I'm doing is calling table.create. That should forward all of this data along to Airtable. I'm going to use my Gadget logger. So you see we do have a logger available as part of this high context parameter. I'm going to go ahead and record what was sent to Airtable. And then finally, there's this piece down here. I'm actually going to modify it a little bit. What I'm going to do is I want to set an Airtable ID on my Shopify product so I know how to reference it on the Airtable side. So the Shopify ID and the Airtable ID are going to be two distinct fields. So I can actually add custom fields to my Shopify product model. I do own this data model. So I'm just going to go ahead, Airtable ID. Now it exists on my Shopify product, and setting it here won't be an issue. So this will just allow me to reference this product in Airtable for my update and delete actions, which is very important. You'll notice I am using the internal API to call Shopify product update. And this is because if you notice, you look at triggers here. Right now, the triggers are only Shopify webhooks and Shopify sync data. So there's actually no API trigger. If I go ahead and just create a custom model, you can see that my trigger right now is actually just part of the public API, your Gadget app's public API. So I need to be able to change my underlying Shopify product data because data sync between Gadget and Shopify is only one way right now. The only triggers by default are webhooks or the nightly reconciliation or data sync. So in order to actually update records in my Gadget database, my Shopify records, all I'm doing is using the internal API, which gives me access to these CRUD operations. Another possible solution, which is how I had it set up before, is I can actually create a custom action. I could call this, set Airtable ID. And you see this automatically has an API trigger. So instead, I could call that action here instead. I'm just going to use the internal API for now and not deal with that custom action. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. Fantastic. So this should create a new product in Airtable. We can go ahead and test this out right away now that I've installed my other Phantom app. I'm just going to go ahead and delete these foods. I'll leave them for now. Let's just go and create a new product. I'll go hat. This is a neat hat. Again, need to enter a SKU. Press save. And if I go to Gadget, I should be able to take a look at my logs. I can see that my record is being created. Perfect. So I see hat exists in my Gadget, and hat also now exists in Airtable. So that's excellent. So now we know we are successfully forwarding those create requests from Shopify. Data is going through Gadget and being sent right to Airtable. I can do the same thing for update and delete actions. So I will just walk through that now. It's pretty similar. The code isn't anything too crazy. Just going to go ahead, change this again, make it Airtable. Perfect. So it looks very similar. We are going ahead and going await table.update. So it's the same table from our airtable.js file. And this is where we really need that Airtable ID that we are storing on our product. So if I go ahead and inspect hat here, we see that we do have an Airtable ID. This will allow us to fire off this update action. It's only going to fire if that Airtable ID exists. So if for whatever reason it doesn't exist, we won't run this update action. And we are, once again, we're just going to be pushing the fields in the same format that we would want to see them in Airtable. We're not including fields like the Shopify ID because that should already exist if it's in Airtable. So I'm going to go ahead and try this out. So this neat hat with an update. Should be able to press save. I can see that the changes have been reflected in Gadget. And if I go over to Airtable, with an update exists on my body here as well. So that's our create and update actions that are working properly. Delete is very similar. Once again, we're making use of that Airtable ID on our product. Paste in code here. Do the same changes here. And we are, once again, if the Airtable ID exists on the record, we're just going to go ahead. Table.destroy is the Airtable API. Passing in that Airtable ID, and then we are going and just logging that information in Gadget. So I'm going to go ahead here, take my hat, and we are going to delete this product. Press delete. So that fires off the Shopify delete webhook. We see hat no longer exists in my Gadget database. Hat no longer exists in my Airtable table. So that's fantastic. So that covers all of our CRUD actions. We're able to successfully send data from Shopify through Gadget to Airtable. It'll keep it up to date. It'll keep it in sync. That's great. The next piece, this is a one-way data flow. It's pretty simplistic. You can modify fields as you want. The other piece of Gadget, this is just dealing with webhooks. I haven't gone through a data sync yet. So as I mentioned before, Airtable does have a rate limit of approximately, and this one I know is 5 requests per second. So if I'm doing a data sync in Gadget, I can press the sync button. This will take all of my historical Shopify products. It'll push them or pull them into Gadget as quickly as Shopify's rate limit allow, and then our actions will fire and that data will be forwarded to Airtable as fast as Shopify allows it. So if there is a difference between kind of the Shopify rate limit and the Airtable rate limit, there could be an issue there. We need a way to make sure that this data sync works successfully and doesn't error out on Airtable side because we're trying to push products too quickly. And what we can do in order to manage this is use Google Cloud Tasks to actually create a queue up these requests, and then make sure that Airtable isn't going to error out on a sync. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a Google Cloud Tasks project now. Let's go ahead and do that. No questions yet. That's perfect. So I'm going to go ahead, console.cloud.google.com. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new project. I'm going to call it Airtable Webinar. I'm using our Gadget organization and location. You may need to create your own if possible. If you haven't used Google Cloud Tasks before, it does come with a very generous free tier. So you should be able to kind of get up, try things out without actually paying for anything, which is nice. So I'm just going to go ahead, select my Airtable Webinar product, and I'm going to go Cloud Tasks. Perfect. I'm going to just go ahead and enable this Cloud Tasks API on my project. At this point, if you haven't set up or signed up for billing in Cloud Tasks, you may need to do that. Once again, there's a generous free tier. It shouldn't be an issue to get off the ground for free, but it is something you might need to do. I'm going to go ahead and just click on Cloud Tasks again after it's been enabled. And excellent. So I come to this Cloud Task Queues page. I'm going to go ahead and just create a new push queue. My queue sounds like a good name for it. I'm just going to choose US Central 1 as the region. The key thing is these advanced settings. So this is actually where you can create some settings for rate limiting as well as retry configuration. So this is really the power of Cloud Tasks. So for example, max dispatches 500 per second. If Airtable's limit is 5 per second, I could change that to 5, for example. So, it does allow you to go up to 500 per second, so you can go much quicker if Airtable allowed it. But because their rate limit is 5, I'm just going to go ahead and set this to 5. I'm going to leave the rest of the settings the same, but I do encourage you, if you are interested in using this kind of system, go through and see what works best for you, tweak the numbers. You can always edit this later, I believe. So this is how you can control your rate limit and retry configuration. I'm going to go ahead and create this queue now. So that's fantastic. I do have my queue created. Now I need a way to actually call this queue from Gadget. I need like an account. So in this case, I am just going to go ahead and set up a service account in Google. Just go to service accounts. And I need to create a service account. I'm going to give it a name. I'll just call it my Airtable account. You can enter a description. I'm not going to do that for now. I'll just press create and continue. I do need to select certain roles to give this account access to my queue. So I'm actually going to use this queue. I will generate a private key for this that I'm going to enter in Gadget, and then I'll use Google's Cloud Client to make requests to this queue. I need this account to be able to make those requests and handle auth for me. So I'm going to go ahead and grant. Let me just see here. It needs the Cloud Tasks in Queuer role. And then I also need the service account user role. That's perfect. So with these two roles, I can now create tasks in my Google queue and use that queue to send information to Airtable through Gadget. Just press continue here. should have these roles. I don't need to do any of this user access, so I'm just going to go ahead and press done. So that's all the setup I need to do in Google. Now I need to copy a boatload of environment variables over to Gadget, and I can start to set up my Cloud Task client in Gadget. So I'm going to go ahead, go back to my environment variables. I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need 6 environment variables. So I'm just going to go ahead, 3, 4, 5. Oh, we have 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill in the names of these first. So I need the private key and email for my service account that I just created. I also need my Google Cloud project ID. I need my Google Cloud queue name. I need the location of that queue. And finally, I need the target service URL. And the target service URL I will leave till last because that is where we're actually going to be forwarding a request. So I'm going to send a payload up to my Google Cloud queue. It will then fire that payload or forward that payload to my target service URL, which ultimately the end destination is going to be Airtable. But we're actually not going to be sending data directly to Airtable. We're going to go back to Gadget and then use that Airtable client to forward data. So I'll start with the service account email. Go in here. This is the service account email. I'm just on the service accounts page. I can just go ahead, copy, paste. Perfect. I need to generate a private key. So I need to go actions, manage keys, add a key, create a new key, and I'm going to select JSON. So I'll press create. What this is actually going to do is download a file to my local machine here. I'm just going to go ahead and open up that JSON file. I'm going to copy my private key. Once again, I'm going to rotate this before the end of the session is posted. So I will just paste it in. It's also very long. So you notice I am copying the entire contents of the private key field in that JSON blob. It gives you a blob with multiple different fields. Just copy the private key in entirety and paste it in here. I will then encrypt that value. My Google project ID, right up here, Airtable webinar. I can just copy that, paste it in. My queue was just my queue. My location was, I believe, US Central 1. I believe that was it. I'm just going to go ahead and double check. Cloud tasks. Come on. There we go. Yep, US Central 1. Perfect. And then my target service URL. So like I said, this is where we're going to be forwarding data from the actually Google Cloud queue. So what I'm going to do here, I will just flip over, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new route in Gadget. So I'm going to go ahead, open my routes folder, and just go post Airtable create.js. So this gives me a new route in Gadget that I can actually target from my Cloud Task queue. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my environment variable. So my target service URL is actually going to be my Gadget app. Just copy this. I'm going to use my development URL. And then I'm going to go /Airtable create. So this is going to send, when I use the Google Cloud Task client, I'm going to queue up data that is then sent to this route. And I'm going to use this route to forward data to Airtable. So this just allows me to manage that Airtable rate limit. Now I can go ahead and install my Cloud Task dependency. It's just going to be yarn install at Google Cloud /tasks. And this will install the npm package. Oh, we had a little issue there. Oh, I did yarn install, didn't I? Yep. Darn add Google Cloud Tasks. Just installing, and we're done here. Perfect. So now we need to make 2 updates. I'm just going to handle create action right now. So I need to go in and modify my Shopify product. Instead of sending data right to Airtable, I actually want to send it to that Google Cloud Task queue. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to do the difference here. So I'm not going to copy a whole file. Instead of importing table here from Airtable, I'm actually going to import my Cloud Task client, and I will just go ahead and set up this client first. Perfect. So this is using that service account email and private key. I'm going to leave my run action the exact same. Now, instead of forwarding information to Airtable, I'm going to want to go ahead and forward information to a Cloud Task queue. So I'm actually going to use a separate function here. I'm just going to add it to the bottom of my file. So this is how we are. It's just a function, create HTTP task. We are setting up my Cloud Task queue. We've got my project with the ID environment variable, my queue, my location, my target service URL, which is my Airtable create route. You can set a number of seconds to delay the request. So this actual code snippet here is right from our middleware tutorial, if you are curious where it's coming from. I can go ahead and create using that Cloud Task client. I'm creating the queue path using the project location and queue name. And finally, I am just loading up my task, giving it a URL, which is my target service. It's going to be a post, and we're setting JSON along. I have a variable on this function called webhook payload. It's really just going to be payload in this case. And I can go ahead and add an HTTP request body to my task. So that will just be that Airtable information or Shopify information that we want to forward along to Airtable eventually. So we're loading that up to my task, setting a scheduled time. So I'm just setting this delay manually so that I can actually flip over to my Cloud Task and see my thing in the queue. Normally, you wouldn't necessarily want to do this. You could probably remove this altogether, as well as the in seconds. And finally, at the bottom here, I am formatting my request with my parent object, as well as my actual task. And I am going ahead and awaiting my client.create task, sending along that request. And I'm just going to go ahead and log my response. So now I just need to call this create HTTP task function up here. I still want to keep all of this data that we're forwarding to Airtable. Instead, though, I'm just going to go ahead and copy a couple more lines here. Perfect. And I will paste in here. So I'm keeping this largely the same, except I'm just creating an object called Airtable product data. You'll notice that the ID, instead of Shopify ID, it's just ID for now. And I am going ahead and awaiting my create task function here. So this should go ahead and create an object in my queue, a task in my queue with this payload, which then calls my Airtable create route. So instead of actually writing logic here, let's just test it out. Let's go logger.info and then body. We can go request.body. And I'm just going to send an empty response so that the queue is happy. So I'm going to go ahead. Let's just go try adding another product. I believe shirt. We did hat last time. This is my shirt. Good old skew. Press save. So what this should do is create a Cloud Task queue for me. Awesome. It looks like that worked. If I go to my actual queue and click on it, we see, yep, this is my actual request. You see it is targeting my Airtable create route in Gadget. Oh, it does not exist. So that means it was probably already forwarded. If I go ahead and refresh this, yep. So it was a little too speedy for me, but if I do go to my logs, I can see I do have my body. Pause the live results here. I do have my body here. So this is all the data that I forwarded from that cloud task. It is hitting my Airtable create route. So that's fantastic. So I know that I am successfully sending things to my cloud task queue and it is being forwarded to my route here. Now I just need to use this route to forward data to Airtable. So in this case, I am just going to do some copying and pasting because the code looks almost the exact same as it did before in our create action when we were forwarding data right to Airtable. I'm just going to paste between my logs data and my response. I do need to go ahead and import my Airtable table up top. So there we go. We're importing this table. We are then creating this new object in Airtable. Instead of record, I am using body of my request. And I am, once again, I'm setting that Shopify ID, the rest of the fields that I included. Because I already did all of this date handling, to date string, all of these empty checks, I don't need to do that now in my Airtable create route. I can just go ahead and take the fields right from my body. They should already be populated, forward it right to Airtable. I am once again updating my internal or my Shopify product using the internal ID, using that Shopify ID and setting the Airtable ID in Gadget. So I'll go ahead, I will create one more product. We'll call this pants. These are my pants. Add a SKU. There we go, a unique SKU. Press save. So once again, we should see that it is added to our queue. Here we go. What I wanted to show before is you can see the payload in the queue here. I've got that 10-second delay, so it's going to sit in here for 10 seconds. And then if we go to our logs, we should see it logged. And voila, my pants have now appeared in Airtable. So that was a successful forwarding of my data from Shopify through Google Cloud Tasks to Airtable. So to bring it all together, I should be able to, I'm going to go ahead and actually remove that delay. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the scheduled time here. So this should allow us to just do a data sync and forward all of my data from Shopify. Go ahead and press the sync. So this will create all of my historical product records in Gadget. It should create a bunch of tasks in my queue. Perfect. That's exactly what I expect to see. It has that rate limit built in, 5 per second. So I should be seeing, if I go ahead and refresh this, everything has now been synced successfully to Airtable without running into any rate limit issues. I can go ahead and verify that in my Gadget logs, but everything looks okay. That is what I expect to see compared to my product page here. So that is my end-to-end demo of using Cloud Tasks to forward Shopify information to Airtable and managing Airtable's rate limits. I am going to go ahead and flip back to my recording here. So does anyone have any questions? Feel free to use the chat. This is my end-to-end demo. Like I said, I will touch on a few ways I can extend this or productionize it if there are no questions. So you do notice that I created a Airtable create route. This could be, if I wanted to create, update, delete for multiple models, this could be super annoying because you'd have effectively a duplicate set of routes for each Shopify resource that you want to forward along. What I would recommend you do instead is actually you can customize this payload being sent to your Cloud Tasks service, and then you can always parse that payload. So if you add an additional field, Airtable product data might not be your only body sent along. You could also do something like, const action equals, products product create, and then forward on Airtable product data and action. And then you could always parse that action in a route and run slightly different logic based on the action that is defined. So the code ultimately at the end of the day, it's probably going to be pretty similar, but it helps minimize just the number of routes, unique routes that you have to create here. And you can use this for pretty much any Shopify resource. Like I said, going from Airtable back to Shopify, it's a little more complex just because Airtable does have some, did have it open here. Let's go Airtable webhook API. There we go. This is what I want. So there is this refresh webhook concept where by default, Airtable webhooks are only open for 7 days. So you do have to fire this refresh every 7 days. You can do that in Gadget with a scheduled global action, but it is something that is a little more complex. So I didn't have time to cover it here. So main advantage of using Airtable's tables over tables in Gadget. Yeah, so that's a good question. So I would say that if an organization is already using Airtable, Airtable might be their complete source of truth is really the answer is if it's an e-commerce agency that is using Airtable to manage all of their Shopify data and custom fields already. This is a case where it might be a way to integrate into the existing infrastructure of an organization as opposed to like, hey, I'm starting a fresh project. I want to use Airtable versus, Shopify versus Gadget. Airtable is also if you're not a developer, it's probably a friendlier way to interact with data. So this just could be the main way that a merchant is actually managing their Shopify data instead of doing it right in Shopify, and Gadget might be a little too technical. So that's probably the use case where, Airtable could be someone in, the product team, the marketing team, the copy team for a large merchant or just a merchant in general could interact with data through Airtable as opposed to in Shopify. Are there any other questions? Feel free to use the chat. If not, I will end this off here. Thanks so much for joining the webinar. I will have this sample app. I'll paste it publicly in our Discord. So if you are interested in looking at the code, go ahead. And this recording will be available on YouTube as well if you do want to rewatch. If you have any questions for me, feel free to, once again, ask in our Discord, tag me there, send me an email. Always happy to help out. If there's no other questions, I will thank you all once again and end the recording. Cheers.